back during the Bush administration, and then with the rise of the Tea Party movement, there was, and I think Paul Krugman was one of the people, I think maybe he wrote a book or column or something on this, and he wasn't alone. They began to claim that the conservative mind was closed. Conservatives were unwilling, unable, uninvested in the idea of learning the arguments of other people and maybe reconsidering things. And that every data point now had to be twisted and conformed to comply with the pre-existing conservative worldview, as opposed to new data coming in and maybe changing the minds of conservatives. This was a complaint raised in the media, raised by columnists, raised by pundits, bloggers, and the like. It became this idea that the conservative mind was closed. No new information allowed. Y'all, the Democrats are there. The Democrats are there. Adam Davidson is a political reporter for, I think, Planet Money. He's a podcaster and radio guy on NPR. He says he's working on a project that shows that there really is no biblical basis for the idea that life begins at conception. Now, this isn't I'm not going to make a theological argument here. Don't tune me out on that. I just need you to pay attention here. It's really important that you understand this. So Adam Davidson, he's been on This American Life, The New Yorker, Planet Money. He's actually one of the people who covered the Jeffrey Epstein stuff. And Adam Davidson says, for a project, I'm researching the biblical case for the idea that life begins at conception. There doesn't seem to be one. It's a brand new idea made up in the 1970s. In the Bible and for nearly all of Christian history, life was thought to begin sometime in the second trimester. This, by the way, is not true. The Catholic Church made it explicit in 1854. Now, we didn't understand until modern science when what was actually going on in there, till we had microscopes and the like to figure it out. But we kind of made that assumption that life began at conception. What's so interesting here is that Tony Dungy, the famous football coach, replied to Adam Davidson with a number of verses in Scripture that point to the idea that life begins at conception, including one very famous verse in Jeremiah 1. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. That seemed to indicate that something was there. And David said, well, that just means second trimester. Now, the trimesters were actually an idea of modern times, not an ancient one. But there's a problem for him, and it's Luke 1. Now, again, this isn't supposed to be theological. I'm just trying to make a larger point here about where progressives are these days. But here's the thing. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and told her that she would be with child. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you will call him Jesus. At that time, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zachariah's house and greeted Elizabeth. Elizabeth, again, who was in the 6th month, meaning Mary was weeks into this pregnancy, if not days. Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit, and in a loud voice she proclaimed, blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear. As soon as the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the baby in my womb leapt for joy. What does all of this mean? It means right there in Luke 1 is a very Christian understanding that life begins at conception. If Mary, we know that Mary was pregnant 6 months after Elizabeth. So she shows up at Elizabeth's house 6 months into Elizabeth's pregnancy, meaning Mary was in the first month of her pregnancy. And John the Baptist in Elizabeth's womb leapt with joy at the presence of Christ in the room. So what does Adam Davidson do? The reporter who's trying to prove this, well, he ignores it all. He says, this isn't true. This isn't true. I know better than you. In 70 AD, while the book of Matthew was still being written, possibly, before all the books of the New Testament were formed, the Christians circulated a document against Roman abortion because of conception. All of this is documented. All of this is there. And what does the reporter do? Nope, that's not true. I know better than you. I mean, he's got Christian theologians pointing out the argument to him. He's got strong Christians like Tony Dungy, famous Tony Dungy. And he's like, nope, I know better than you. It's not true because I don't want it to be. The progressive mind is now closed. All new information must be twisted to conform to the pre-existing liberal worldview. Here's another completely random example in Slate magazine appearing today. How Americans became convinced divorce is bad for kids. Listen to this. A careful review of academic research and the historical and cultural context in which it was conducted calls this shared understanding into question. Most of the problems associated with being a child of divorce are instead related to sexism, racism, homophobia, shoddy record keeping, and insufficient government support. Got that? Ask a child of divorce whether the problems in the divorce were related to sexism, racism, homophobia, shoddy record keeping, insufficient government support, or because mom and dad broke up. The left can't take the data and think anew. They've got to conform it into existing constructs already in their heads. And right now, intersectionality is the construct in the left's head. Everything is on this plane, intersecting the characteristics of people. Race and sex and gender, if it's not aligned with sex, and whether someone's gay or straight, male or female, handicapped or not, religious or not, that's intersectionalism. And so divorce now has to play into intersectionalism. Well, divorce is bad for kids. We've known divorce is bad for kids. Kids in two-parent nuclear households, even among parents who do not like each other but stay together for the kids, outperform kids in divorce. Parents who stay together for their kids and wait until their kids get divorced later in life outperform academically because their parents are together in a two-parent nuclear household. The data is there. The data supports it. And the left's way to push back on that data, they can't get out of the habits to show the two-parent nuclear household is good. They can't embrace that worldview. So instead they say, no, actually, it's homophobia, sexism, racism, misogyny, bad record keeping. J.B. Pritzker is the governor of Illinois. He was on with Jake Tapper this weekend. Jake Tapper asked him about the shooting in Highland Park. And then Tapper asked him about all the other shootings. I mean, more people died in Chicago over the weekend than died in the Highland Park shooting. And Pritzker couldn't entertain it, did not want to entertain it, wouldn't engage with it. We're trying to make all of Illinois safe. Pay no attention to Chicago, and how dare you, Jake Tapper, ask the question. Kudos to Tapper for asking about that issue. But Pritzker couldn't engage with it because the Democrats have accepted the norm of violence in Chicago and have decided it's for the black community to talk about. So they don't want to talk about it. The black community won't talk about it, so nobody's allowed to talk about it. They can't open their minds to other possibilities. They can't open their minds to the idea that maybe they're wrong. The Episcopal Church, the leaders of which will one day find themselves in a very uncomfortable position before the throne of God, have over the weekend condemned crisis pregnancy centers. They really believe that if you go to Planned Parenthood, you're given all of the options and not just pushed to have an abortion. But more than one pro-life group has done undercover investigations of Planned Parenthood, and where the woman goes in and says she wants to keep the child, she's looking for other options, the people in Planned Parenthood basically say, you can't keep the child, you're not responsible enough, you need to abort the child, because Planned Parenthood only makes money from abortions. Multiple undercover pro-life groups have found this, all unrelated, all uncoordinated. Around the country, Planned Parenthood pushes women to have abortions. And yet they're denouncing crisis pregnancy centers because they're so committed to abortion, they can't think differently about the issue. And a crisis pregnancy center, as they call it, a pro-life pregnancy center, is a place where a woman can go who doesn't want an abortion, and they provide her diapers, they provide her free health care, they provide her free ultrasounds, they provide her rocking chairs and cribs at either discounted or free costs. They teach her how to raise the child. They provide formula at discounted or free costs. They take care of her and the child, and they continue the relationship well after the child is born. All of the things the left says the right does not do in these centers, the right exposes that they do. So the solution from the left is shut them down. Elizabeth Warren attacks them. Now the Episcopal Church, pagans who engage in Christian cosplay, they want to shut them down. On guns, on abortion, on the environment, on life issues generally, on divorce. Democrats are ignorant, defensive. They cannot accept that their monopoly on truth has been broken. They cannot accept that there are competing ideas. They do not want to know you and me. They think we're the enemy. They don't want to relate to us. They don't want to understand our arguments. It's one of the successes of the conservative movement in the last 20 years is because the left is so dominant culturally, so dominant within media institutions, so dominant. We have to learn their arguments. They never bother to learn our arguments. We know their arguments better than they know our arguments. They caricature our arguments. They vilify our arguments. They never treat them honestly or sincerely. They believe now that they all come from positions of homophobia, misogyny, racism, sexism, transphobic, whatever. They don't bother to learn them and fairly articulate them in a way a conservative would with charity and good faith, the way we have to do with their arguments, because they don't think we matter, and so their minds have become closed to us. It's really just profound to watch this happen. It's also why we're winning at this point, because we're open to new data, and they're not. And they believe that we're closed and they're open. And open to them is a closed mind. They've been so open for so long, their brains have fallen out. They can't get it back in. It's remarkable how closed-minded now the left has become to any argument that contradicts them. And they scream and call you a racist at the slightest provocation because they cannot even at this point entertain basic common sense arguments. Again, you've got this guy who worked for NPR out there trying to say there's no evidence anyone anywhere in 2,000 years of Christian history, despite copious documentation, thought life began at conception. The Bible itself suggests it. No, I know better than you. And Slate Magazine saying, you know all that research that shows that kids do worse after divorce? It's actually not because the parents got divorced. Divorce is okay and should be encouraged. It's actually racism, homophobia, misogyny, sexism, and the like. Everything must conform to their pre-existing worldview. They cannot let their worldview evolve because they've dug in on the dogma. And that's why our side continues to make inroads with Black and Hispanic voters, with other races, with other incomes outside of rich white people that the Democrats thought were just the Republican Party, because conservatives speak the language of America and Democrats now speak the language of the faculty lounge.